Another type of informal power that presidents have that isn't written into the Constitution is the ability to go ahead and sign what are called executive agreements. So what is an executive agreement? As always, I'll start with a definition. An executive agreement is a non-binding agreement between the current administration and a foreign power or foreign powers. In other words, presidents, as I've indicated before, are the sole voice of the nation in foreign affairs. They speak on behalf of the country. And so they have the authority to enter into agreements with other countries just based on their own authority as the chief executive, commander-in-chief, all that. But the thing about executive agreements, and the reason that I call them non-binding, is that when the new president comes in, they can just disregard or wipe out the agreement of the previous president, right? So for example, you'll see on the list the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. That's the technical term for what we frequently refer to as the Iran nuclear deal. This was a deal that was arrived at in consultation with China, Britain, France, Russia, and the United States that limited what the Iranian government could do by way of developing nuclear weapons or nuclear power in return for us lifting sanctions, economic sanctions on them. This was a deal that was negotiated by the Obama administration in conjunction with 4 other countries that took some time to develop, but ultimately developed it. They developed it and it was signed. When President Trump came into office, he disagreed with the Iran nuclear deal, didn't feel like it was tough enough, and so he pulled out of the executive agreement, right? And so it was no longer an agreement between the 5 countries in Iran. Now 4 countries and Iran sort of had this deal, but Iran, because it was pissed off that economic sanctions weren't being lifted, it said it wasn't going to abide by the agreement. And so they started continuing with their development of nuclear power and facilities sufficient enough that they could, in theory at least, generate a bomb. Then when President Trump left office, President Biden has been in the process of trying to renegotiate an agreement once again and reinstate it. This is a perfect example of an executive agreement. If President Biden eventually comes up with a plan, it's 2022 right now, if the next president disagrees with it, they can just wipe it off the books as well. The same thing happened with the Paris Accords or the Paris Agreement. This was an agreement that President Obama signed when he was in office with other countries to lower carbon emissions in order to address the issue of climate change. When President Trump came into power, he went ahead and disagreed with that, the Paris Agreement, and so he pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement. And then when President Biden replaced him, then we re-entered the Paris Agreement, and that can just change back and forth. So unlike treaties that are legally binding, executive agreements are not. They survive for the length of the president. Now, the president doesn't have to get rid of it. If the president agrees with the previous executive agreements, he can just carry it over. The main thing here, you won't find executive agreements anywhere in the Constitution. This is just a power that it is presumed that executives have, and everybody sort of agrees to that, even though if you look through Article 2, you won't find it anywhere. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and this will take 2 videos to cover, are presidential signing statements. Now, this is something that hardly anybody knows about, and quite frankly, I didn't learn about presidential signing statements until I was a graduate student at UCLA. Okay, so what you're getting is what I learned as a graduate student at UCLA when I was working on my master's degree. So let me explain to you what a presidential signing statement is. As you know the process now, but how a bill becomes a law. When a bill comes before the president will sign the bill into law, and oftentimes what they'll do is they'll include a signing statement. Right? Now there are three different types of signing statements that I'm going to talk about. Non-controversial, somewhat controversial, and very controversial. Probably in this video I'll get to the non-controversial one and then I'll stop. And we'll pick up the somewhat controversial and very controversial in the next video. In a non-controversial signing statement, what happens is the president gets the bill, he signs it into law, and just writes a positive statement about the law. So we talked about Phil's corn law, right? So if the president signed Phil's corn law into law, he might write a presidential signing statement that would include, praise for me for writing the bill, for Congress for passing it, making the world safe for corn or whatever the president's going to write, and that would be it. And so when that bill that has to do with the regulation of corn goes to the Department of Agriculture, because they're going to be the ones who carry out the law, right? The president isn't going to carry it out himself. The Department of Agriculture in this case is probably going to carry out Phil's corn law because it has to do with corn. The Secretary of Agriculture is going to get the bill. He's going to look at it. He's going to go, oh, wait, there's a presidential signing statement. Let me see what this says. He's going to look at it, realize that it's like an attaboy. Good job, you guys. Way to get this passed. Disregard it, and then look at the actual law itself to figure out how the Department of Agriculture is going to implement the law. So in this case, and in most cases, presidential signing statements are not substantive at all. They don't do anything. They're just a way of the president going on record and essentially writing a thank you note to everybody who is responsible for helping pass that law. So on the exam, I'm not going to ask you about non-controversial presidential signing statements, and please don't write about non-controversial signing statements because then I have to read it, right? And then I can never get that time back. So if you get a question about presidential signing statements, you're going to talk about somewhat controversial signing statements and very controversial, which I will pick up in the next video.